So most astrologers hold that the age of Pisces, that's the one before the age of Aquarius, began roughly around the year 200. So like just for fun, look up what the world looked like in 200. That was the age of Pisces. At some point, we should be entering the age of Aquarius. Was it in the 1960s? I don't know. If you're looking at a 26,000 year span, the 60s wasn't very long ago. So it could have been then, it could be tomorrow, it could be next year. We're not sure. But that's the age of Aquarius. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this is from a really cool NASA link that we can include, is that all of these kinds of cycles were actually determined about a century ago by a Serbian incredible scientist. He was an astronomer. He was a climatologist. He kind of did everything. And his last name was Milankovitch. And so they're called the Milankovitch cycles when you look into these things. And he's one of the first who looked at the changes in eccentricity of the wobble of the Earth. So I just wanted to mention that. Another thing that's important to point out in terms of what Robert's talking about is when the collective consciousness begins to shift, and this is something Lee Harris talked about with us, Daryl Anka, when he, talked about Bashar, this is sort of this conversation about what does it look like when existing systems fight back to an elevation of vibration, right? Or a collective consciousness beginning to shift. It can look like political turmoil, institutional breakdown, the rise of authoritarian leadership, which is why a lot of people see what's going on in the world as a possible hint that the age of Aquarius is upon us. We may see increased polarization, ideological extremes. So entering the age of Aquarius, is just one piece of sort of a larger puzzle that so many of our guests have talked about. And obviously I saw it in Robert just when he walked in because he looks so different. And as he said, he's undergoing a transformation. Now that we've covered the dawning of the age of Aquarius and also what a cool musical game to play, we're so curious to hear what songs were Billboard #1s when you all were born. We wanted to find out from Robert kind of how he got here. He has a very interesting background and he's going to talk about it. Let's hear a little bit more about how that transformation needed to occur. When did you first have an indication that you could be in touch with these kinds of things?
When I was a big Pharma CEO. Sounds kind of funny, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think that astrology is just mumbo jumbo, but without understanding, and they also think that mythology is mumbo jumbo. What if I told you that those things, whether they're astrological in their nature or mythological in nature, they're simply archetypal? And go into Jungian psychology, and then you start realizing that all of these things have deeper symbolic meanings. So I had always felt like, well, geez, we often say that there's no truth to astrology. And so from a reductionistic scientist perspective, we can't even apply any kind of logic behind the thinking of it, but yet millions and billions of people follow it every day in some way, shape, or form. And there must be something to it if that many people are actually following it, right? And same thing with mythology. Maybe the mythos that we're seeing and we're hearing the stories about are actually the things that we're living in our life and we just haven't done yet because we're cycling through time in a hero's journey. And that hero's journey is something that we don't really realize because we come in here into this world. We're born into a world of separation. We're born into a world where we think, okay, I'm in this material world and everything is separate from me. And so I start building up my persona more and more, not through what I decide I'm going to be, but rather what I decide what I'm not going to be. Because those things that bring me shame and blame and guilt and pain are the things I say I'm not that. And then instead of me recognizing that I maybe am those things as well, I start blaming other people for being those things. And that's narcissistic self-projection. And then we just continue on until we become absolute narcissists by the time we're in our midlife. And we have a hero bias, and we believe that we have to be existing so that, we can only define ourselves by where the villain begins. So where the villain begins is where the hero ends and vice versa. I just read a quote yesterday that showed every dragon births a slayer. And I think from a philosophical perspective, we start to realize that there's something more to this archetypal knowledge. So I started noticing patterns in my own life and seeing that I was facing the same challenges over and over and over again in the corporate world, in my personal relationships and my friendships and everything. And as I started realizing those patterns, I started noticing that there was a pattern tied to numerology, that was directly tied also to astrology, that was tied to some hidden geometric form. And music is just the geometry we experience with our ears.
I loved how you talked about music in one of the Codex episodes. I can't remember which, and it may come up, in a few places. But this notion that that's sort of your brain's way of showing we can use both sides in this beautiful way, but that they're kind of mirror images of each other.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we are living in a world of mirrors, and we live at that boundary of the mirror. And that boundary is defining a conscious persona and a subconscious collective, or collective unconscious. And that's exactly where I believe we're living. And so instead, in that context, then, when you finally transcend beyond this notion that we live in a material world, but actually we live in a mentalism world, because you don't experience the world as it actually is. We all experience the earth, and our experience here is as we are, not as it is. We can't separate our conditioning bias. And so we could say then, in that context, that maybe all of academia is some sort of hallucination to believe that their version of objectivity is actually objective, when there's no such thing as objective experience. There's only subjective experience. I've never once had an objective experience. Not in science, not anywhere. Because I can't separate. And this is what happens with big pharma, clinical trials. They get so ensconced in believing this is what it has to be that you can create the outcomes, right? This is like the Hawthorne effect. If you go and weigh yourself every day, the chances you'll be able to lose weight because you're micro changing, making titrations to your own belief system that you're going to lose weight, because your expectation, if I'm standing on a scale every day, I better be losing weight. Or if you're fearing too much that you're going to gain weight every time you step on the scale, you'll actually gain weight too. So this idea that we live in a material universe, I think, is an entirely wrong supposition. And I think that the evidence is very, very much pointing to that you can't separate your experience from your own conditioning bias.
When you started to have that realization as an executive, was there a moment that you were like, my journey is now over here? What was that transition for you like?
It was funny because my career was kind of very unusual. I always was like kind of, I don't know. When I was born in Texas, my mother tells me the story that, one kid a year in the hospital I was born in, and they were not wealthy at all. They were quite poor. And one kid a year is given, a silver spoon. And so I was the kid that got the silver spoon. So it shows up in the newspaper and everything, like a child born with a silver spoon, even though I was like not born with a silver spoon at all. And so I get the silver spoon, and on my 50th birthday, my parents came and gave me the plaque with the silver spoon and everything in it, in this beautiful like box and all. And it happened to be exactly around the same time as well that we went to the moon, right? Or purportedly. And this was the Apollo 11 mission, right? The Apollo 11 mission. And so it's kind of interesting, because as we start to form our persona, we start to separate out even gender. So that becomes the thing that we're not, right? And then as we get through life and we start realizing what got me here won't get me there. And I was in a work situation that I always just had like this incredible luck. Like every time I would fall in a pile of shit, I would end up somehow coming out better off than before I fell in the pile of shit. And I could never understand it. It was like this weird thing. People would say I was like born with like I could always pull a rabbit out of my backside, always. And I would take massive risks, always huge risks. And then somehow it wouldn't always go exactly as I wanted, but it would always turn out for the better. So no matter what the circumstance was, I was always blessed, right? So it's like every very, very difficult circumstance I experienced, I finally realized, looking back on it, that it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, was that just my attitude? Did that then create the outcomes that led to that? I don't really know. But what I can tell you is that I was constantly lucky. And I was also facing the same challenges over and over and over again. I couldn't understand why. And in about 2016, I had one of the companies, I was the president of Allergan Medical, which was a big pharma company. Allergan makes Botox, Juvederm, Lap-Band, Latisse. Those are all my products. I launched those, made them like household names, and had thousands of employees. And I was kind of a high flyer in my 30s, right? And then I became, at 40, I became CEO of Bausch & Lomb Surgicals, which is like another big, giant corporation. And then I left that, and I wanted to learn the secret sauce of private equity. And then after doing that for a few years, I realized, oh, the secret is there's no sauce, there's just debt. And if you know how to play the debt, and I became like a master at the financial side of things, I figured that out, but I was always an operating leader, and I loved doing it. That's what I did. I would do like big turnarounds, and I always had like this lucky somehow, I don't know, the rabbit's foot or something. I always had some sort of aspect that would just kind of carry around with me that always made me lucky. And then finally, I faced a huge crisis in 2016, and I thought I was out of rabbits. Like no more rabbits to pull. I had my own company.
Crisis? Oh,
no, I had my own company. I'd founded it in 2012, and then it got to unicorn status. It was over $1 billion valuation within 2 years of me founding the company. And then next thing I know, like one of the VCs that backed it decided to get kind of greedy, because the way it works with VC world is that if everything goes exactly as the CEO plans, the VC will make 2 times their money. If everything doesn't go as the CEO plans, and they hit a bump in the road, and it could just be exogenous market related, then the VC makes 3 to 5 times their money. And then if things really go bad with the outer market, then the VC can make 10 times their money. And so this is why they're called Vulture Capital very often, because they just then take the equity of the founder and cram them down. It's called a cram down, right? And so they do a next round valuation, and they have all kinds of anti-dilution protections. And so as a result, the money that they put in at $1 billion valuation, if they could push the valuation down to 200 million, it gets rehypothecated at the new valuation. So if you put 50 million in at $1 billion, you have, less than 5% of the company, like 4% or something like that. And if you could get the company's next round, and you can block them from getting any other investment from other parties and make their life difficult, then you could push them down to a $200 million valuation, right? Because they have no other way to get money in the company. And if they're burning a lot of capital, then you've got them dead to rights. And so then the VC comes back to them and says, okay, I'm going to do this at $200 million valuation now. So my 50 million is now 25% of the company. This is the game. So I went through one of these. I don't know anyone who survived this type of thing as a CEO. Luckily, I did. I was able, at the very last second, I had to raise $55 million in one day, or I was going to lose all the control in one day. And somehow I pulled a rabbit out and raised $55 million in a day.
Was that from one person?
It was 40 million from one group, and it had to be one of the current investors.
Wow.
It was 40 million from one group, and it was 15 million from me and my backers, right? And so I kind of was like, whoa, that was a close one. Because I was going to lose it all if I didn't raise 55 million. I thought that's it's absolutely impossible to do that. So when I did finally, then I kind of was like completely freaked out, because I felt like I won, but I lost the war. I won the battle, but I lost the war, because the carnage that came as a result of that, you can't believe what these VCs will do. They'll go to the people that are loyalist to you, and they'll basically say, if you back us in this plan, then we'll give you like 0 value stock options. And so you'll be able to make $1 billion off of this type of thing. Look, we're all going to do this. If we can cram down the company, we all get a better deal. And we just didn't want the CEO. So all they're really doing is just stealing the CEO's equity. And so what it did is it caused me to go, why in the heck did I have, because I had about 1,000 employees at that time. I said, I had probably 700 of them had worked for me before at different companies, had been absolute loyalists and everything. But as soon as they were faced with, not having their own income guaranteed, right? Then all of a sudden their ethics flip to, oh, this is unethical. And whatever is expedient for them and beneficial to them becomes their moral imperative. So it just told me there's no such thing as ethics. It's complete bullshit. It's only what will benefit you. And we lie to ourselves and everybody else and say, oh, whatever it is that will benefit me financially or socially or reputationally is the moral imperative, without a doubt. That's what we do. Look at politics for details.
So how did this lead to a shift for you?
I started realizing that everything that I thought was a fact, that I had built my entire outer world on, believing that the outer world was separate from me, and I was like trying to be a hero in this world, as a narcissist does. And narcissism is something I believe every one of us goes through. It is not something, even people that claim to be, people that are empaths. Some of the most narcissistic people I've ever met are the people that claim to be empaths. And
it's all about how it influences them and impacts them.
Yeah. Absolutely. They're like, my narc this, my narc that, and then everyone's got to be toting or all around them and make them, it's like, they're just covert narcissists. They just don't realize it. So there's overt narcissists and there's covert narcissists, but there's still narcissists. And it's just like this, it's like I started noticing this, that the people that called out other people for being arrogant were the most arrogant people. And so it's like, if you spot it, that means you got it. So I started seeing the hypocrisy in everything. I started noticing, well, why is it that policemen choose to be cops? Why is it that they choose to be cops? Is it maybe that they're trying to repress the notion that they're actually wanting to be criminals? I'm not saying this for everybody, but there is
cops
something.
are criminals. I've seen the documentary.
Well, that's why our media often is reflective of that. How many stories is it the cop right on the edge? He gets flipped over. It's always
totally right. And lawyers, you could say the same thing, and judges and all these different professions, people that choose to be doctors, right? It's like, what is the real intention? Oh, I want to be Doogie Howser. Or no, you want to be recognized for being smart, and you want to get paid a lot of money for doing that too. So there's this side of it that is, I'm doing this for the patients. So we always want to put on the white coat like the big pharma company does, right? And so they can go and sell the idea that, okay, I'm going to launch a drug like Provenge that costs $100,000 per treatment for, prostate cancer. And I can justify that because I'm helping people.
So what was it like for you to step out of that? What did your life look like?
Well, it was a massive shift. So what happened was I still retained control of the company, and I still remained as vice chairman of the company, and I had, 90% of the voting rights in the company. But I left as CEO. So I stepped out because I was like, wait, why am I experiencing this kind of betrayal? So I asked myself the bigger, deeper question. It's like, why did I choose this? For the first time in my life, it wasn't, why did something happen to me? Because that's what the narcissist does. The narcissist is constantly deflecting. And constantly, it's like when Adam is in the Garden of Eden, he eats the apple, and God shows up as, Adam, where were you? Oh, I was hiding. Why were you hiding? Oh, because I'm naked. Who told you you're naked? Did you eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Yeah, the woman that you gave me and commanded I should remain with her, she's the one, that bitch. She gave me the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and I did eat. Eve, what did you do? The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. So the first time it says in the Bible that Adam felt ashamed. The first translation of that ashamedness, right? That shame feeling was blame, instantly. And that's the deflection that we all do. And that's how we build up for the first half of our life, right? The name of God is supposed to be, I am that I am, right? But the first half of our life, as we go through this narcissistic arc, it's, I am not that, I'm not. And then when we finally realize, wait, it's not, it's just like the scene in The Matrix where Neo is sitting on the park bench and the Oracle says, do you want a candy? And he says, well, we already know if I'm going to take a candy or not, so why are you even asking? And she says, look, if I didn't already know this, then I wouldn't be much of an Oracle. And she says, but that's not the important question. The important question is not what you will choose. It's why you already chose what you chose. And to me, that's where I started realizing, okay, we're living this life. This outer world is more of a you inverse as a mirror reflection of what's inside of us than it is a universe.
This is another great place to jump in, because one of the things that I really appreciate about Robert's perspective, he sees all parts of himself. He sees the part of himself that was the successful CEO. And I mean, these are huge companies that he's talking about. And as you know, like, this is no small thing to succeed in that business. What kind of personality would you say you have to succeed in that world?
I mean, it's sad and scary to say that most personality types who succeed at the highest level of corporate America are semi-ruthless, unemotional, very pragmatic, and you can want to take care of people, but as he says, the incentive structure of these organizations is such that you got to take care of your own, and as soon as you're at risk, it's kind of battle on all fronts.
Well, and what he talks about is, we hear this word narcissism, and it's such like a buzzword for us, right? It's on social media, and he's a narcissist and she's a narcissist. But what he talks about is that everyone has to go through that sort of phase. And the world that he came from, that business world, it's a real kind of shadow side. And as he's going to talk about, when we think about Jungian psychology, and Jung was obviously a student of Freud, right? And extrapolated and did a lot of different things than Freud did. But one of the main things that Jungian psychology gave us is parts work, shadow work. What are the darkest parts of ourselves? And what's the opposite of the darkest parts of ourselves, and how can we find it and be that person? So I'm so excited that Robert can speak to kind of literally both sides of it and also give us a bit of a guideline into what shadow integration looks like and how the things that he saw about himself became the impetus for transforming into something truly magnificent. So what was the message that you were able to glean about yourself?
That my life's journey, and I started noticing the pattern that I had experienced over and over and over again with increasing intensity, was to experience betrayal. Now, why did I choose to experience betrayal? Because I really came here to learn unconditional love. So what's the opposite of unconditional love? Betrayal. We come to this place to experience limitation for Source Creator. That's what I believe. What's the one thing that God cannot experience in his or her omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence? It's the one thing that it cannot experience without us. And it also cannot experience the ability to see itself without some form of mirror. And we are those mirrors. You know, I can't see itself without the aid of a mirror. A light can't light itself. A fire can't burn itself. A knife can't cut itself. Likewise, consciousness cannot perceive itself without dividing itself into mirrors. And we are those mirrors. So we each have a job in that process. Our job is to be the most unique mirror we can be and stop trying to be somebody else and realize that you are everything else. That's when the arc of narcissism ends, because you realize, wait, I'm doing this for myself. The universe didn't happen to me. It's happening for and through me. And I chose this. And why did I choose it? Well, because I wanted to learn unconditional love. And the only way to learn unconditional love and to absolutely experience unconditional love is to fully accept its opposite. Because until I've learned how to fully accept betrayal, that it exists, I haven't yet learned unconditional love.